Hello, I'm Taylor Armberding, Senior Security Strategist for the Synopsys Software Integrity Group. And I'm here on the chaotic floor of the Expo Hall for RSA 2018, and very pleased to be speaking with Scott Crawford, Research Director for the Information Security Channel at 451 Research. He leads coverage of emerging trends, innovation, and disruption in the information security market. His experience includes systems and security management for leading organizations in both the public and private sectors, from Emerson to a division of the University Corporation for the atmospheric research in Boulder, Colorado. And Scott, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it, appreciate the time.
Thank you, Taylor. Pleasure to be here.
First question, in the so-called layered security strategy, where does getting software right, where do you put that from a security perspective?
Well, it's absolutely critical. It's related to everything from managing vulnerabilities in commercial off-the-shelf software to managing exposures, intentional or unintentional, in customer bespoke software. It hits every security operation at every level, from the initial development of applications to their deployment and operational production. It has to be taken seriously either by commercial software providers or by organizations that build their own software, and certainly by those who produce software as their intellectual property. And this is something I think is not really yet fully appreciated by the market as a whole. That those who produce commercial software do make this investment, have to make this investment. It's essential to reducing the exposure. It's essential to getting control over the attack surface that attackers can take advantage of. So it's something that organizations, no matter what your business is, if you deal with software or technology in any way, it's something you have to be aware of, you have to take seriously these days.
Right, okay. 451 issued a report on WannaCry nearly a year ago. And in it, you raised several questions. Will this incident result in a new sensitivity to just how critical information security has become to virtually every aspect of life? Will this mark a watershed to making security a priority on a par with IT's business objectives? Okay, those were two questions you raised. In the last 11 months, what has been the answer to those questions?
Well, it's an unfortunate fact of life in security that a lot of what we do is really event-driven. This is a fairly reactive field, and it's not because people who are professionals in the practice of security are themselves necessarily reactive, quite the opposite. In fact, the security profession has tried to cultivate more of a risk management approach to assessing and understanding exposures and issues that can be resolved by organizations, and placing emphasis on those that should be prioritized and dealt with first, and dealt with in such a way that you're not exposing your organization to undue risk. But it's not always security people who make those decisions. Those are often business decisions, and to the extent that a security organization aligns with the business priorities, with the priorities of the business, in such a way as to protect the business's most sensitive and critical assets, then a security organization will do well. But it's just simply a fact of life that events are one of the things that drive investment, that drive response, and WannaCry has been one of those kind of events. One of the things that really stood out about WannaCry was just the nature and scope of affected systems. I mean, we're talking about a vulnerability that in some cases is years old, and difficulty in remediating those in some of these environments that are critical to safety and life, like healthcare systems. Not always easy to resolve, and not because these are not simple vulnerabilities or issues to resolve through regular software maintenance and update. It's just that it's difficult to get them as a business priority for an organization. If you're a healthcare organization, what's your priority? It's typically on clinical care, prioritizing patient needs. To the extent that technology supports those, then yeah, it's going to be important. But you often have to have incidents like these that raise the visibility of what you need to do in order to protect people. And unfortunately, we're going to have more of these types of incidents the more pervasive that computing capability and intelligence becomes a part of technologies of everyday life.
Absolutely. Why do you think that people and organizations continue to fail to patch their devices and systems? Does a lack of support through other business priorities really make patching that difficult, especially when they're usually offered for free?
It's a very facile argument to say, well, you should just patch, you should just maintain. And it is rarely that straightforward. Patching itself, I mean, it reveals an awful lot of, I don't want to say ignorance necessarily, but it reveals a lack of familiarity with what really goes into maintaining the software and the technology estate. Even when you have a patch or an update that's been proven to work as expected and not have unforeseen downstream consequences, impact on dependencies, which is a difficult enough challenge of its own, you're going to have operational dependencies. You simply can't take systems offline. In fact, this is an issue with operational technologies that we see more and more. Operational techs that there's a critical physical dependency on having it available 24/7.
Yep.
You can't take them offline to maintain. It's one of the advantages of like cloud-based infrastructure as a service platforms is that with immutable infrastructure you do have a strategy for gradual replacement of vulnerable components, but when it comes to like operational technologies where that has to be available all the time, you simply can't take it offline. There's another issue that we saw like with the Equifax breach, for example, and the well-publicized struts vulnerability. People say, well, you should have just mitigated the struts vulnerability. Well, that's taking for granted the fact that there are a lot of critical dependencies on that underlying architecture, and it has a lot of impact downstream, and it's just not simply a question of go in and fix it. You're going to be breaking a lot of other things in the process. And in the case of a healthcare organization, is it a priority? Do they have budget? Do they have people to do it? Are they required for whatever constraint to maintain systems that are pretty old by the standards of the IT industry? Sure. So there's a lot of dynamics involved that just patches just far too facile an argument. It's just not, it's not realistic in a lot of cases.
What do you see as emerging trends in application security?
I think there needs to be increasing recognition of the extent to which application security has an impact on so many different aspects of security. Technology is fundamentally what people make of it. What people make of it in terms of technical implementation is software, typically. And even hardware, firmware, embedded functionality is functionality developed, built, and deployed by programmers. The trends in infrastructure towards more programmable infrastructure and this whole concept of infrastructure as code that's so fundamental to the DevOps revolution, again, it's programming. And it's software, and software security principles can apply there just as they apply to any other aspect of programmable technology. So the one thing I really think is important to get across to everyone, not just the security market, but IT practitioners and the business itself, is that software security and application security is fundamental to so many aspects of technology. People need to get more familiar with the processes and tools that make software secure, particularly as we go headlong into this revolution towards more DevOps and agile development.
What would you say is disrupting the InfoSec market?
We get asked that question all the time. What are disruptors in information security per se? And I think people are maybe looking at the wrong things when they're looking just within the InfoSec market. The most disruptive things that we've seen in InfoSec in the last few years have come from outside InfoSec, and probably the most significant disruptor has been the evolution of cloud. There are some things that with cloud and DevOps technologies and what we kind of consider in the aggregate new IT, if you will, that have actually kind of solved a lot of long-standing security problems. For example, it used to be, to collect an asset inventory might take you days, if not weeks, maybe longer, and when you had it, you often had to use a specialized tool to do that. When you had it, you would consider yourself fortunate if your inventory was like, 70% accurate. That's great. Yeah. But nowadays, you can query a cloud environment via API, get a very accurate inventory back, sometimes within seconds. Of course, it's elastic and dynamic. It may change from minute to minute. But some of these problems that we've wrestled with for security for a long, long time, these new approaches to IT development and deployment have really changed the nature of those problems. But it's introduced new problems at the same time as well, too. The type of expertise you have to know how to administer and deploy cloud environments, the way that you develop for them. Containers actually is a good example. One of the primary reasons for developing containers in the first place was to deal with these chronic application dependencies that if you were a developer, you had to make sure you had the right environment to deploy in, or it wouldn't work.
Right.
So containers have dealt with a lot of that. Security has benefited as a result. So a lot of the disruption is coming from outside the security space per se.
All right, last question. What, in your view, is the current state of ICS security? Is it improving or getting worse? Are best practice guidelines and standards going to bring it to an acceptable level, or do you think there needs to be government intervention, as some people have called for?
There's probably a lot of room for regulation and intervention in a lot of aspects of what we kind of collectively consider the Internet of Things. Smart technologies that are increasingly pervasive through so many different aspects of technology. In industrial control security, now that's a field that's been around for quite a while. And there hadn't been a whole lot of activity until relatively recently, and part of the reason for that is that increased awareness of the intelligence of so-called smart systems, the increasing integration of compute capability with operational technologies has really raised the awareness and potential of what could happen. We've seen this driven by events as well too, so large-scale power outages occurring on a pretty regularly predictable basis in Eastern Europe. But also we've seen things like increased vulnerability counts in industrial software. The US ICS CERT, the numbers on vulnerability counts started to go up rather dramatically in the last year or two. But part of that's a good thing. Part of that has to do with increased awareness. So we have more people looking at the issue, we have more researchers investigating it. So that's all good things. So just because it looks like vulnerability counts are going up, that doesn't necessarily mean things are getting worse, but it does mean there's more eyes on the problem. But here again, so much of security being event-driven, it probably will take a significant event to further increase awareness. But at the same time, the fact that we haven't seen such significant events, I think speaks a lot about the level of investment and awareness that there already is in terms of industrial security. So should you be concerned? Yes. Should you be maybe not as concerned as you might think you have to be if the sky is falling, but there are eyes on the problem, and that's a good thing.
That is a very good thing. Thank you so much. We've been talking to Scott Crawford of 451 Research. Thank you for taking some time to speak with us. Once again, I'm Taylor Armerding for Synopsys.